Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's special live stream. Today, folks, on Breaking News Now, powered by our friends at Altium, we're featuring a business leader that has become, trust me, a go-to resource for not only learning what is going on in global supply chain, but why and what to expect next. Stay tuned for actionable perspective and market intel that's going to make you smarter and more informed going into your next business conversation. So I want to get to our feature segment here today on Breaking News Now. I want to introduce our esteemed guest. Now, our guest's work and commentary and expertise on topics at the intersection of supply chain management and economics, well, it's frequently cited by all the major media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, ABC News, CNBC, and many, many others. He serves as the Eli Broad Professor in Supply Chain Management at Michigan State University's Eli Broad College of Business, which sits atop many rankings of supply chain management programs around the world. Let's welcome in, you know him, I know him, we all love him, Dr. Jason Miller. Hey, Jason, great to have you back with us. How you doing?
Doing well, Scott. How you been?
I'm doing great, and I really appreciate the work that you do out there. I follow you all the time, and I love the data-driven approach. We need more of that out here, really in the world, not just in business. So, Jason, with that note, we're going to jump right in. You ready to go?
Yep, I am.
All right. I want to start with some recent trade data that's been released. Check out this headline from CNBC. They point to the November deficit, which grew a good bit over October. But really all of 2025, if you look at the monthly trade deficit numbers, there's been lots of volatility from $136.4 billion in March to only $29.2 billion in October, which was the lowest since 2009, I believe. And then, as I mentioned, in the numbers released just recently for November, the U.S. trade deficit almost doubled from October to $56.8 billion. At the same time, Jason, you know this as well. Hey, China's still winning. China reported a record trade surplus of, get this, nearly $1.2 trillion for the full 2025 trade year. So, Dr. Millen, given all of that, right, what are your general observations with what's going on with global trade right now?
Yeah, so I think especially on that trade deficit topic is folks just be ready for more of these wild swings. A lot of what we saw recently was a combination of gold leaving the U.S. There had been essentially a whole bunch of gold brought in that January, February, March 25 period. It's now getting shipped back out because we didn't tariff gold. A lot of volatility then on pharma imports. So that March 2025 record trade deficit was heavily due to imports of GLP-1s and GLP-1 components from Ireland, as an example. The thing that really has sort of popped out to me is you can start to see the United States almost decoupling a little bit from global trade.
Yeah.
And by that, what I mean is our imports of finished motor vehicles are down 15 to 20%. But our exports of finished motor vehicles are also down 15 to 20%. Our imports of steel and products made of steel are down 20, 25%. Our exports of steel and steel products are down 15 to 20%. Our imports of machinery needed for factories is down 10 to 15%. Our exports of machinery needed by factories elsewhere in the world are down 10%. And so that to me is this narrative that really is showing up as almost this decoupling with the U.S. We'll see how this plays out over this year. On the situation with China, I've been frankly surprised at how well many of their exporters were able to find alternative markets for their products. If you would have asked me at the start of this year, will China run a record trade surplus in 2025? I would have answered absolutely not. But especially exports really picked up to Africa as an example, as a new destination market for things like solar panels. There's no doubt a lot of Chinese exports of components are going to South Asia, to your Vietnams, your Cambodias, your Indonesias, being assembled into finished goods and sent to the United States. So the one thing I would tell folks is there's a key distinction we make in the trade literature between what we call gross trade statistics, and that's what we're looking at with the releases, and what we call trade in value added, which basically decomposes and says, well, we may have furniture that comes from Vietnam to the United States, but if 60% of that value of furniture is in components that came from China, the United States really is not as decoupled from China as it appears.
Right.
So if there was one statistic I would love to have, and it takes a very long time to calculate these, would be what is the decline with the U.S. in terms of our gross trade with China? We know that versus our trade in value added. I would wager somebody a nice steak dinner. The answer is the trade in value added is not nearly as decoupled as it is our gross trade makes it appear.
Right. Jason, good stuff. We're going to keep our eyes on this decoupling, the continued decoupling trend you pointed out, amongst other things. I want to ask you to weigh in on something. I sat in on a really big panel from our friends at LogiSim. They probably had a dozen folks, and I tell you what, some really heavy hitters. And one of the things that was said on this panel, Jason, we all heard about China +1 and China +2 or beyond, but one of the panelists said, well, on the flip side, here in recent months and in large parts 2025, based on the trade war, we've seen a movement towards USA +1, where folks are looking, to your point, for other markets, China and many, many others. Your reaction to that, Jason?
It's what you would naturally expect. Is under so much uncertainty about what will tariff rates be, we're starting to see, exporters looking to diversify away from the U.S. market. So Canada is the prime example of this, given how dependent they are on the U.S. market for their exports. I believe the BBC or the Guardian, one of the UK news outlets, was recently talking about how UK manufacturers are increasingly looking away from the U.S. market and looking back a little bit more towards the European market as sort of a similar example. I think one issue as well that's emerging, and I believe the Wall Street Journal just ran an article talking about this, is how from multinational manufacturers that are making investment decisions and they're eyeing, do we open a factory in the U.S. or another factory in the U.S. versus do we open another factory in China or a factory in Vietnam? One of the challenges now is that the U.S. investment looks a little bit less attractive than it did, let's say, 2 years ago, just because of all of this uncertainty.
Right.
And I think that also ties into this feeling of, do we want to make these long-term hundreds of millions of dollar commitments that if there's a massive change in tariff policy, all of a sudden, these assets are worth a lot less.
That's right. And talk about change in tariff policies. I mean, it was just a couple weeks ago, and this is the extreme of the extreme. I think we saw a 10% tariff applied and pulled back in less than 24 hours. So it's crazy times we're in. I'm going to switch gears here because one of the things that you were reporting on over the weekend, I believe, was the producer price index data for December, right? And you were sharing some analysis over the weekend. And one big finding you shared, and I think we're dropping the link to some of that coverage there on LinkedIn, is that you hope that buyers of fabricated metal products and machinery have increased their budgets for the higher prices that we're going to see this year. So I got a two-part question for you, and I've got some graphs when you're ready. I stole your charts, Jason. Could you share make sure we're all together as part of this conversation, share what the producer price index data is, and share some key takeaways for supply chain pros out there?
Yeah, so the PPI data, the producer price index data, they're collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics every month, and they essentially capture, for the vast majority of industries, the price that producers are receiving for goods or services. So, for example, the PPI for, let's say, fabricated metal products like steel cans is capturing what does a steel can manufacturer receiving for steel cans. The PPI for truck transportation is asking what are truck transportation firms receiving for their services. And so what we've started to see is a very clear sort of bifurcation of where buyers can expect price pressure this year. If you're buying products that are primarily a petrochemical base, as an example, you're not looking that bad for 2026, because with oil prices where they are, they essentially trended down last year. You're not experiencing, your upstream suppliers having much input price increase that they have to pass on to you. What it looks very different, though, is if you're buying inputs or finished capital goods like machinery made of metal. In that case, for all fabricated metal products, prices are up about 7% year over year as of December. That is the steepest increase that we've seen in the last, 15, 20 years, outside of course, the 2022 sort of global inflationary shock.
Wow.
What is so different about this in comparison to 2018 was in 2018, energy prices were going up. Crude oil was going up, as an example. Here we've had this big increase without energy prices going up. The same story holds for machinery. We were actually in an environment where year-over-year price increases were trending down at the start of 2025. They were up just 2.4% year-over-year in January 25. That's a historically low rating. We're now up to the mid to high 4%, and there seems to be more signs that that is accelerating upward. And so this is where right now, for a lot of buyers' budgets, is you really have to be making a decision, okay, where, essentially you have X amount of budget. Take a look at that composition of those purchase categories that you're buying. If it's made of metal, you're going to be paying more. If it's imported, in most instances, you're going to be paying a lot more. On the other hand, if it's a petrochemical base, you're not looking at those type of, price increases coming about. And so what we're really waiting to see is how this plays out over the next several months. My hunch is that at least for the first 6 months of this year, because of many of the tariffs really not kicking in until October, you're going to see this steady upward pricing pressure on a lot of more producer or industrial inputs. And I think that that's something that may not be fully being budgeted for, because I think in too many instances, we think, what's headline consumer inflation doing? That doesn't look that bad as of December. Let's maybe project that forward. Or somebody looks at steel prices and says, oh, steel prices haven't went up that as much as, as we expected. Maybe it's not as bad, but then you see the fabricated metal products are trending up like they are.
Okay. We're going to, I would take your prediction to the bank. So we'll have to have you come back on in a couple months, and we can evaluate as we get deeper into 2026, but going more broadly, right? You track economics all the time. We've seen some interesting and some divisive rate cut policies. So there's lots of different takes. We've got a new chair for the Fed being proposed. We'll see how that plays out. But above all of that, and in terms of broader economic observations, what would you share with us here, Jason?
So I would share right now that this is one of the most difficult times, I think, to forecast where the economy is going to be at, because traditionally there's almost lockstep movement between job growth that gets picked up in the monthly survey the BLS does, and then GDP growth is calculated by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. 2026 is likely going to continue, at least for the next quarter or two, sort of this trend where we're going to have minimal job growth, is what it feels like. We're expecting that once the BLS releases the annual revisions of the employment data, that we likely saw very, very, very few jobs added to the economy in 2025. Yet, from a GDP basis, it was a very, very, very strong year. And so that is, I think, creating a major disconnect for a lot of folks. What I'm watching so closely is to see if there's any sign of different asset classes starting to devalue. Obviously, last week on Friday, we saw huge declines in gold and silver prices. Now that's rebounded a little bit. Right now, just today, we're watching Bitcoin fall to the lowest level since, I believe, 2024. And then, of course, the big multi-trillion-dollar question is, are we properly evaluating the artificial intelligence ecosystem, not just the hyperscalers, but then all the demand for the data centers and things of that sort? And so that's where I think that there's you can have disagreements about it. If you see AI as a bubble that's waiting to pop, you're going to be a little bit more pessimistic. If you're somebody who sees the AI as the next computer revolution from, let's say, the late 80s, early 90s, you're going to view things very differently. And so I think that to me is part of the issue. The other thing that we're grappling with is we very likely, Bloomberg was just talking about it, 2026 may be the first year in this country's history we actually have a decline in our population. We've not had that since 1790, as far as we can tell. The U.S. has always been growing. But with changing immigration policies, it appears that this may be the year we're set to actually see a decline in the population. Depending on how you view and what part of the economy you focus on, that a decline in the population may mean a lot. If you're a food manufacturer and the population starts dropping, unless you're gaining market share from your rivals, that is a huge concern. Versus AI ecosystem doesn't really affect you at all. And so I think that's where we're living in a time period where we've had the greatest tariff increase put on in 100 years, that we're going to start to feel, I think, more of the effects this year, sort of on the pricing side especially. But then we're in the middle of a once in a generation capital investment boom. And then we've got a major change in immigration policy. That is a mix that is very, very, very difficult to predict. And combined with, again, some asset classes that are seeing record values, precious metals. And then, prior to some of this, again, if you look at cryptocurrencies, you go back a decade, Bitcoin is not worth, $70,000 a coin. It's worth a couple $1,000 maybe a coin. Kicking myself, the classic, if you could go back in the past and tell yourself anything decade ago, be like Bitcoin, Bitcoin and gold.
Right.
But, so I think that's the thing. And, I think it ties into the conversation. You got to be checking a lot of indicators. Any one data series is not the magical silver bullet. To me, that's the other thing, is just seeing where it all plays out. It's like the Fed says, being data dependent. I think Kevin Warsh was, of the candidates available, was the strongest pick. I will be very curious to see if he has truly changed his stance, because he used to be a major hawk on interest rate hikes.
Okay.
I think somebody commented he didn't see an interest rate hike that he didn't like if you go back to his time previously in the Fed. And so has this, really changed? I think we'll get a really good sense the next 6 months. If inflation has proven anything since COVID, I'm assuming it's a lot stickier than what folks think, because I can remember at the end of 23, going into 2024, there was talk, we're going to have 6 or 8 interest rate cuts and all of this, and inflation proved much stickier than anticipated. And so I think combining all of that together, we had the cheap energy coming down last year. Energy is not slated to get cheaper this year.
Right.
So
we'll have a hard time meeting demand, and it's not just in the U.S., but globally. I'm still stuck though on that population. The population decline, possibly the first one since 1790, if I heard you correctly there. And if that does happen, Jason, that's decades before most common estimates, from what I understand. Is that right?
I believe so. And again, it's essentially 100% tied to immigration policy.
Right.
And the question then, though, is from a, let's say, shelter inflation standpoint, that actually benefits consumers. If we have a declining population, well, that means shelter costs would get a little cheaper. So that maybe on that side of the equation, it's beneficial. But on the other hand, from the side of the equation of having folks to work in, let's say, food factories, I did 2 summers in high school doing jobs like that. That is not work that the average American wants to engage in. Not to be mean, but it is not. I was a 16-year-old kid at the time, so job was a job. But I think that those are some of the issues that we're going to see a lot more conversation about. We even have, I believe, starting March 1, the Small Business Administration is going to prevent green card holders from getting small business loans.
Wow.
And so what does that do from an innovation standpoint? Because, that has always been the unique feature of the U.S. economy, is our ability to essentially out-innovate anybody. And obviously the greatest concern is that if you look, it maybe the last couple years, take out the AI ecosystem, but if you start thinking, let's say, pop culture phenomena, K-pop Demon Hunters, South Korean, social media, obviously it's TikTok, it's Chinese. And so then the question is can we still foster that type of innovative ecosystem here that has made us front and center? Because when you look at the US, and if you go back 40 years, it was very rare, let's say industrially, we weren't world leading in almost every industry. Today, best semiconductor equipment in the world, ASML from the EU. Best manufacturers in the world of semiconductors, TSMC from Taiwan, Samsung from South Korea. Best industrial robots, you're looking at Fanuc from Japan. Best machine tools, you're looking at the Germans or the Japanese. And so I think that that's where keeping the innovation alive and figuring out how we do that is going to be just so absolutely critical from a long-term growth standpoint.
That's right, Jason. And how can we design policy both within industry and within our governments and beyond to practically power that innovation? So the jury's out. We shall see. Hey, really quick, T Squared tuned in from Baltimore. He holds down the fort for us on YouTube, says those data centers are definitely a determining factor for energy prices skyrocketing. That's right. We've been talking about that for months, and hope this finds you well, T Squared. Jason, really quick, before we bring on a word from our friends at Altium, your comment there around the data centers explosion. I think we got 3,000 more data centers either under construction right now in just the U.S. or that are being planned. Jason, your thoughts?
It is certainly going to impose challenges on our electric grid. I believe I just saw CNBC today just mentioned that ERCOT, so the Texas regulatory body that has rights to oversee this, is opening up and looking at the permits for several data centers that have been approved, but essentially don't have plans to figure out yet how they're going to connect to the grid. Electricity prices are up. That is, from an energy standpoint, continuing to rise. That is not going to get cheaper. One of the challenges, too, is that the electric power transformers that we need to generate electricity are subject to 50% tariffs on their steel and aluminum content. And so, we'll have to see how this all plays out. I don't think anybody in their crystal ball would have predicted that the topic of data center and electricity prices would be front and center in the midterms this year. And I'm willing to bet even more front and center on a presidential election in 2028. But we're going to see that talk of electricity prices being up as much as they are. It's going to be critical. It's also, again, important if we think of a lot of our heavy industry uses tremendous amounts of electricity. Many of them are generating a lot of their own electricity on site. But if you're not, again, long-term competitiveness, you have to have a very powerful, stable electric grid to support heavy industry. And I think folks do tend to forget just how large of a manufacturing country we are. We're still second largest in the world. Yes, China is much larger than us, but we will never catch China from a production standpoint. That's just not possible at this point.
And speaking of energy, one last comment here. Access to energy has been a big driving factor for greenfield site selection. Right, it's been a great advantage for the U.S. markets for a long time. That's one more thing we got to protect. So lots of things to solve. But I'm going to pick back up on the other side in just a second. We're going to talk about dynamic pricing. But before we do that, I want to invite this message from our friends at Altium. Hey folks, Scott Luton with Supply Chain Now here. I want to share a terrific resource for all the fast-moving, hard-working SMB teams out there making it happen. Altium Develop is a unified platform for engineers that collaborate on electronic design without enterprise complexity or clunky overhead. This innovative platform provides all participants continuous insight into the end-to-end development process so that they can co-create products together with the power of peer-to-peer collaboration. Now, Altium Develop was purpose-built for small and mid-sized organizations, and the platform helps every discipline: electrical, mechanical, software, sourcing, manufacturing. It helps them all connect and co-create on an unlimited basis, all in a shared environment that aligns data, context, and purpose, and in continuous real-time fashion. And we've got to find new ways to remove the friction, cost, and silos that slow talented teams down. Here's an opportunity to unleash your organization's full technical creativity, production velocity, and overall performance. To learn more and to take Altium Develop out for a test drive, click on the link in the comments. And as always, let us know what you think. All right. So, Jason, we have got a big holiday coming up. Valentine's Day is coming up. Let's see, February 14th, right? Saturday, February 14th. And according to some data out there, it suggests that Valentine's Day is the 5th biggest holiday for e-commerce. How about that? So I want to ask you, you were interviewed about dynamic pricing a while back by our friends at WXYZ ABC 7 up in Detroit. And I think it was focused maybe around Cyber Monday, if I'm not mistaken. So I want to ask you, tell us a couple key takeaways that may apply for the rest of the big holidays moving forward into through 2026, and for that matter, elsewhere where dynamic pricing may be utilized.
Yeah, so especially thinking the B2C side, when we're talking dynamic pricing, essentially it's an algorithmic pricing approach where you are adjusting prices very quickly based on where your sales are at, especially sales relative to forecast, where your rivals' prices are at, where your inventory levels are at. So in other words, if you know you're going to run out of something, you might as well raise up the price a little bit and make as much profit on those last unit of sales as what you possibly can. And if anything, minimize your stockouts. So we're going to continue to see, approaches like this more and more and more rolled out. I mean, obviously we've seen ideas like this used for a very long time in the airline space through their revenue management approaches. And not only, that, but we also have another effective holiday coming up this next week with the Super Bowl. So you can equally expect folks going online. Let's put it this way. If all of a sudden one of the teams goes up by 30 points, I'm pretty sure you can probably guess that the apparel for that team is going to start rising in price. And who is ever is underwater by 30, that apparel price is going to start getting discounted.
No doubt.
So, it's the reality of the world that we live in. I think where there are some interesting ethical questions. So, for example, I'm not the most technologically savvy. I'm still running like a 6-year-old Samsung phone. My wife, on the other hand, has a newer iPhone. There's talk of, okay, you can sense it's me coming on. You may assume I'm a lower socioeconomic demographic. You charge me less. You charge my wife more for the same product because you can tell it's a newer phone.
Interesting.
That's where we get into some very interesting ethical issues. It gets even more, I think, troubling than that when we start doing it based on the, let's say, 5-digit zip code from which you are coming in from. So that's where I think a topic that we're going to see a lot more conversation about, I think, even at a national level. I always go back to the example. I mean, this kind of dates me, but when Target, this was years ago, but there was this big scandal in that they had seen this young girl. She had been in a store and online. She had been looking at products for children, specifically newborns. They started sending things to her house. Her parents got very upset. And essentially turned out she was pregnant and she was starting to look for things. And so Target knew before she had told her parents. And so, that issue really, I think, brought some of these issues of, okay, how much data are companies collecting from us in order to actually make these inferences? I think we'll start seeing that conversation accelerate even more. because something like dynamic pricing is an ideal setting to continually train better AI models on as well.
Yeah, man. Changing times, fascinating stuff. I appreciate that, Jason. Well, I want to shift gears as we come down the home stretch here on Breaking News Now, on Supply Chain Now. And I'll tell you, there's good news and unsurprising good news, I tell you, released about Michigan State University and your supply chain program, because U.S. News and World Report ranked the Eli Broad College of Business #1 for supply chain management late last year. I think it was last September. So I got to ask you, 15, that's quite a track record. What do you think is one of the big differences that sets apart your supply chain management program from many others out there?
Yeah, so I think it's both a combination, both historical but then present. So historical, MSU was one of the first programs that adopted sort of the 3-pillar approach for teaching supply chain, of having expertise in sourcing, operations, and logistics, which actually have historically been almost 3 separate academic disciplines together in one roof. That model has been largely cloned subsequently, but if you look back, 15 years ago, MSU was one of the few programs that would have looked like that. And then I think from a contemporary standpoint, we still interface a tremendous amount with industry through our supply chain council. And I think that helps keep the questions relevant. I'll be honest, I think the abysmal weather that we have here for multiple months of the year gives us an incentive to be doing research. And that helps us keep very productive in the rankings. A lot of us in academia joke that typically the most productive research universities are often in the north, because honestly, what in the world else are you going to do from about November through March or April? Kind of locked at home. You might as well get some work done, or locked in the office and get work done. But then I think too, the history of, Michigan's still one of the largest states from a manufacturing standpoint. And I think having sort of that, historical footprint also helps.
Yeah. Well said. Well, congrats to the whole Michigan State University family, doing great work, turning out great talent, making impact across not just global supply chain, but all of business. And on a lighter note, maybe all that bad weather gives us one last chance to turn around those population trends. We'll see, Jason. All right. So other good news, and this really speaks to how plugged in, you and your team are across industry. You've been appointed here recently to the state of Michigan's Commission for Logistics and Supply Chain Collaboration. So I got a 2-part question for you, Jason. I think you just had y'all's first meeting as part of this commission. What are the objectives that the commission has in place, number one? And number two, do you feel that other states, every state maybe, should have something similar to this commission?
Yeah, so the big objective of this commission is really to support, the state legislature and the state's executive branch, and, I'd say heavily sort of an informational manner. So in other words, being able to provide resources to various constituencies. We've got to figure out what our agenda is for our next meeting, so I can't speak too much about it. But I do think that we really view sort of that informational role as critical. And should states have something like this, I think that the more you can bring, it's a combination of folks in the commission are both in industry as well as academia. And I think that, again, bringing those different diverse voices together can be very valuable. A simple question, for example, for our state is just, what does our industry composition look like? Because, the first statement anybody thinks of with Michigan is the motor vehicle and parts sector, which is absolutely critical. But the question then is, okay, well, yes, but back in the late 1990s, it was much more critical than today. What are the growth trends as we start thinking about things where there may be opportunities for thinking about grants and things like that to help, fledgling industries or take advantage of our, natural resources. Great example, Michigan is the second most diverse food growing state in the United States, believe it or not. We trail only California.
Interesting.
And so you think about that from a food manufacturing standpoint. Are there possibilities of sort of boutique food manufacturing entities? They're not going to employ that many people, but they're going to allow farmers to better leverage their crops, better give them maybe another secondary market beyond just, your local farmers markets for certain goods. And everybody benefits out of it. And hey, hopefully you're producing a specialty product that you can actually afford to transport across the country, but still be price competitive. And so that's where I think, I hope to see a lot of this is, being very informational and then hoping to allow our policymakers and businesses to essentially make better decisions based on the information they have available.
Yeah. And that, and we're able to do that regularly and consistently. That's a big win. That is a big win. And I had no idea in terms of the diversity of food production in Michigan. That's quite a little.
I didn't either. But yeah, we are an incredibly diverse food growing state. Believe it or not, it's not all just snow here. Only about 4 months a year.
Well, here in Georgia. We got Chick-fil-A, of course, started here, and Coca-Cola famously started here. Peanuts are still a big export, as is poultry. If you think of one last question before we make sure folks know how to connect with you, if you think of all the Michigan products and the foods and brands, what's one of your go-tos, Jason? Can you pick one out off the top of your head?
Oh, without a doubt, Republic Cherry out of Traverse City.
Okay.
Anything cherry related, you're not going to beat that. And then Dearborn ham. Dearborn ham out of there is no better ham in this country than Dearborn ham.
All right, I'm gonna thank you for putting those on my radar, and I can't wait to explore a vibrant food industry there in Michigan. Okay, well, Jason, our time, I tell you, this is just sped past. Thank you so much for taking some time out with us to inform and educate us. Let me ask you. I know you do a lot of speaking, interviewing, and of course, research, and you name it. If folks want to follow up with you on anything you've shared here today or invite you in to speak to their organization or you name it, how can folks track you down?
Yeah, best way to track me down is probably LinkedIn. So just send me a connection request, and that's probably the easiest thing. If you do throw my name in Michigan State, my profile should in Google, my profile should be the first thing to come up.
Outstanding. Well, we're dropping your LinkedIn link right there, folks. You're one click away from connecting and following this go-to resource for all things, well, especially the intersection, as I shared on the front end, for all things global supply chain and economics. That's quite a powerful 1-2 punch. Dr. Jason Miller with Michigan State University, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Look forward to having you back again soon. Really enjoyed sitting down a couple of years ago with you and some of your students. We'll have to make that happen again. Folks, hope you've enjoyed and learned from this great conversation as much as I have. I learned from Jason whether it's social or in person, you name it. Quite the go-to resource. But hey, the pace of global business velocity is only getting faster and faster. We got to stay informed by turning to trusted sources of sound information and analysis, like Dr. Jason Miller here with Michigan State University. And be sure to tune in to Supply Chain Now wherever you get your podcast. So with all that said, Scott Luton here on behalf of the Supply Chain Now team, challenging you to do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. We'll see you next time right back here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.